Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Jake. Great to be here.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. So we're gonna.
I've got immediate hair envy, by the way. I just have to point out. So.
Well, there you go, mate. You have a couple more years on me, so it could easily be the case for myself later down the line.
Yeah.
Let's kick off exactly where we were on email earlier today, which was the fact that Bitcoin is a forcing function for truth. What do you mean by that?
Okay, well, that's a cool place to start because I think about this a lot, and I think it's something that I've always been pretty obsessed about, and something that I kind of feel is under assault in our modern world. So I think it was the Oxford Dictionary in the year 2015. The word of the year was post-truth. So we have this. So
what does that even mean? Yeah.
Well, exactly right. We live in this post-truth world, right? Mm-hmm. And so with that comes this relativism where you have people speaking about your truth and my truth, and then we have this thing called Bitcoin that comes into the mix that brings a couple of things in, whether it's an invention or a discovery. I don't know. I know people debate around some of those things, but we have verifiable truth, not just in real time, but temporally as well. And I don't think that we've had that. And what it started to do very much for me was, the initial thing, of course, is exposing the lie of fiat. But as you become increasingly aware of just how pervasive that lie is and how you've corrupted this kind of base layer of civilization, which is the way that we communicate value, it tends to create this impulse. And I experienced this myself, but I see it in a lot of other people, where you start to think, well, man, if that was all a lie, and that thing is so fundamental to my existence, it's kind of half of every transaction. It's the other side of what I trade my life for. What else have I been lied to about? And of course, the antithesis of a lie is truth. And now we have something that is absolutely verifiable. We did a little experiment on I think it's on YouTube somewhere, but Ben got a couple of people together and we were all in different time zones. And we just, against our nodes, just went and, verified the supply at a particular block height. And the fact that multiple of us could do that across time zones, across the world, you can't do that with anything. So, I don't know, maybe we can start off from that point.
It's a brilliant start.
What do you think?
When you say, okay, so you've got all of these people, friends, dotted around the globe in different time zones that are able to survey or analyze or double check an open ledger, and they all look at the same time on a video call. It's like you and I talking right now with like 4 other mates in different places, and we're like, what's the block height right now? And what transactions are going through, and everyone can see the same thing.
And A, what's the block height, but B, what is the total Bitcoin supply?
Yes. Where are we on the issuance process? Yes, exactly. And this idea of measurement is so interesting because no one's like, oh, that's not 30 centimeters. Okay, because it's a clearly defined distance. Oh, no, that's not 27 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius or whatever it may have been today. You're like, well, it was, because you can show it, right? But when it comes to value, how do you measure value? And in a sense, value is objective. So it completely comes down to the individual. It's like in any one moment, you're going to value certain things differently. And therefore, measuring it's really hard from that perspective because every individual person has a different motivation when it comes to value. But the obvious point is that when you're using a dollar or a euro or a pound, that you start looking at the inflation rate, you're like, actually, how many pounds are in circulation? Like where I grew up, the Bank of England stopped releasing information on how many pounds they create. You can't find it from them, even if you want. So it's this idea of measuring stuff with a ruler that is incorrect all the time. And Bitcoin flips that. It's like all those people in those different places. Please, Chris, go.
But I mean, even think about this, Jake, because you can say, okay, you can be on the other side of planet Earth and you've got to verify a measurement with your ruler. But how do I trust that your ruler is actually according to the ISO standard?
True. Yes, good point.
So that's the map measuring the territory. But now you've got this thing for the first time ever where the map is the territory. So, you and I can independently on opposite ends of the world verify not only the supply right now, so we can kind of run an experiment like the scientific method. And the scientific method works. You can repeat an experiment in the now, but you can't do that on a temporal axis ever. So as soon as you're looking at history, you have to rely on an authority. Except, and I think I was trying to think about this. Is there anything else other than Bitcoin where you can go back to a point in time and you can verify a truth claim historically, temporally, with absolute certainty?
Certainty, probably not. I'm immediately thinking of like a rock formation, and how, but that's not certain, is it? Like it's different. It's very different, and you're not using rock formations to measure value.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Okay, and you can go down a rabbit hole too, right? Because I mean, we love to talk about
far away. This is a rabbit hole, environment. That's what this is all about.
But if we love to talk about first principles in Bitcoin. But if you think in terms of a first principle truth of what you can know with certainty, it's very hard to go beyond just the reality of this. I'm definitely right now having this experience. Beyond that, you start to have to, you've got to rely on the authority of your five senses and your eyes and everything else. And all I know is that I have the authority of my parents and some photographs that I was born in 1969, believe it or not. Hard to believe. Then I have this experience of emerging into consciousness. And then I've lived these 56 years on this side of these eyeballs in this kind of internal reality with, I think, another personal presence or something, which is the ought, which is the beginning of the moral argument for God. But this thing blows my mind about Bitcoin as well, is now for the first time into that internal reality, I can actually take economic energy in the form of a brain wallet. And I'm not recommending a brain wallet to anybody, but this is wild that I can take economic energy, I can bring it into that internal world, and I can carry that with me everywhere. And my wife and I experienced this because we left Australia I had a very bad reaction to the whole COVID insanity. And that also kind of reinforced this kind of, I knew that there was a lot that was a lie. I didn't realize the scale of it before that COVID experience. Wow. But to be traveling around the world, and we put everything that we had into Bitcoin, and we just memorized an 18-word seed phrase.
Wow.
And the empowerment of crossing borders, knowing that you have access to economic energy, they can strip you, they can do whatever they want. We'd look at each other and laugh. You come into land, they say like, if you got more than 10, exactly. And we kind of look at each other and it's like,
not in dollars, mate.
Yeah, but I love that Sovereign. I'd read that Sovereign Individual book it came out, and Blood in the Streets.
Oh, you
prior
did
to
when
that.
It came out. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And the book they wrote before that was Blood on the Streets. I had an interesting grandfather, and he got me to read Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West, which they reference quite heavily as well.
Wow.
Which is a pretty depressing book. Sovereign Individual is a bit more optimistic, but I mean that's that kind of sovereignty that comes from being able to carry your economic energy in this internal world that prior to Bitcoin was only inhabited by myself and
your memories.
Yeah, exactly. And even your memories, I've realized that the authority.
Well, you can't tell for certain if they're true.
Well, yeah. So I was kind of thinking, can you run an experiment with Bitcoin now? Because you can, with other parties, put a transaction onto the blockchain, and then you're allowing the future to come to you, and then you can go back and verify that what you did over there was true. I don't know. You can still kind of go around this ring where it's like, oh, well, how do I know someone hasn't just injected these memories into my brain now? But I don't know.
Well, I mean, Chris, a billion different directions to go in, and I always love these conversations because I learn so much. What I'd like to draw on, okay, so if you're 56, roughly 20 years older than myself right now, I turned 37 a week ago, and you mentioned your grandfather. Thank you, mate. Yeah. So why was your granddad an interesting influence? And if you could, a whistle-stop tour through what the last 30 years, has been, and in particular, I love understanding like which were the breadcrumbs that hit home for you that were like, I've got to look at this thing Bitcoin a bit more because this doesn't make sense. So just help me understand that. I mean, it's like, what's how's your life been? It's a huge question, but if there's anything that resonates from that, I'd love to hear.
That's an interesting one, because I think I should have been a shoe-in to get Bitcoin in 2011, and I didn't get Bitcoin in 2011. I got it. I think I was only really aware of it. I'll tell you how it came into my radar in a tick, but maybe to go back to the grandfather thing. So I'm 11th generation South African. So my family moved to South Africa in the late 1600s, 450 years, which topples some of the narratives going around about the South Africa situation at the moment, but we can get into
so
that at some
old
point.
In that sense. It's wild.
Yeah. So, obviously, my surname is very Afrikaans, so we come out of that sort of Dutch culture. My grandfather, my father's side, his father played on the first rugby tour to your country, to the UK.
No way.
So cool. I've got a Springbok rugby blazer hanging up on the wall over here.
Cool.
Johannes Chris Wessels.
Wow.
Now, he's got an interesting story, because he was one of 8 kids, and they were farmers. And when the Boer War happened, and Lord Kitchener had something called a scorched earth policy, killed all their livestock, put him and his whole put the whole family into a concentration camp. He was off it as a Boer commando fighting. He was the only one of the family of 10 who survived the war. So all his brothers and sisters and his parents died in the concentration camp.
That is intense. Fuck.
And then the amazing thing, Jake, is that after that, he went over to the UK to play the first international Springbok rugby tour against.
Wow.
So he was kind of able to separate the nation state insanity from the actual people.
Yes,
right?
Okay, cool. Wow.
Yeah.
That's very important, actually, because the average citizen is not their government.
Yeah.
And even right now, with missiles flying left, right, and center, I've got Israeli friends very close with, and I'm like, what the hell is going on here? But like, they're not the Israeli government. And likewise for them, right?
Yeah.
They feel a lot of pressure, I think, sometimes. It's like, it's just unnecessary, because you guys are not the same people at the top.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to get into that, though.
This
is really cool. Keep going with the family history. Your grandfather, when he got to England, he would have been fucking up for it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Apparently, back in that day, what went on in the scrum stayed in the scrum.
Yeah, right? My gosh.
He was a hooker. And it's funny, actually, because my youngest son, who's 23 now, he's just started playing club rugby. So
cool.
Maybe some of the heritage comes through there. I don't know, because since the great-grandparents, it's been a pretty sorry performance on the sporting front for the Wessels family. But I mean, you touched on that, separating those two things. And I think that's another thing that Bitcoin does address. I see kind of the three major concerns I have in the world at the moment. The one is obviously the centralization. So we're all aware of how Bitcoin mitigates that. Then there's the relativism, which we've touched on already, and how it potentially is a forcing function for truth. We could drill into that some more as well. But the third one is the collectivism thing. And that is always, you've got to have that for the divide and conquer strategy, right? And the way that Bitcoin kind of empowers one on an individual level to be resilient against that, that, I guess, the communist impulse that I'll be generous with the fruits of your labor. Yeah. So
it's quite incredible, the Bitcoin rabbit hole, in that it is so multifaceted that there is no end.
Yeah.
And I never expected it to be such a rich intellectual experience that it has proved to be, and continued, it will be into the future.
Yeah.
We'll come to some of these major topics you just mentioned, but I'd love to continue the kind of family history, because it's always fascinating to me, like, what brings you to today?
Yeah.
And so your granddad, like, okay, he went to play rugby in England. I hope he won.
So, this is the great they lost.
Oh no.
Yeah. It was back in the day when you guys were still inventing these games and winning them, but I think subsequent to that, mostly the rest of the world. Yeah. That was my great-grandfather. Right?
Okay.
He made a quality decision to bring his children up speaking English, because he felt there was no future for Afrikaans. So I thought that was interesting, yeah. And then he died actually at a younger age than myself, because after the rugby, he worked in the mines, and he got some sort of lung disease associated with that. It's quite a sad story. But anyway, his son kind of grew up. So his dad died when he was, I think, 11. And he had to start looking after his family pretty much from age 11. So his mother and his I think he had 2 sisters. So both my grandparents came out of poverty, but became sort of self-made men.
Okay.
So the one on my mother's side started 3M in South Africa, and the big company 3M, yeah. So built that up within South Africa. Saw that there's a whole story around that, but anyway, in terms of what he was doing, in terms of sort of Black economic empowerment and stuff, and establishing schools in the sites, that I don't want to go there. And then this grandfather started Masonite. So they were both pilots, flew, self-made. The interesting thing is that wealth that they created kind of didn't go past the second generation, which again, it just gets eroded through inflation. So the reality of observing that. But that grandfather, so the one who was then brought up speaking English, I spent a lot of time with him when I was young. And he was the one who kind of really got me into, he wrote a book called Beware of False Prophets, which was kind of a political commentary, very hard to read. But spent a lot of time as well tracing our family tree back for 11 generations.
Wow.
Which was interesting. So I've been entrusted with maintaining that. And so kind of speeding up a bit, he always kind of challenged my thinking from a really young age. He used to take me around to play people chess. He taught me to play chess when I was really young. And then he'd go and challenge people to play his 5-year-old grandchildren and put money on it and that kind of thing.
Cool.
So kind of moving to the Bitcoin thing. I went to university. I studied mechanical engineering. I used to joke and say that my 4-year degree was the best 8 years of my life. At age 56, I kind of look back at it now with some sort of embarrassment, and I just think, man, what a waste. I'd love to have that. And all of that was funded through my grandfather's largesse as well. So I had a pilot's license when I was 17, could only get a driver's license when you were 18. I went to a very privileged boarding school, but I never really appreciated a lot of it at the time. But always kind of had a voracious appetite to read. So the Blood in the Streets, The Sovereign Individual, those sort of books. Creature for Jekyll Island, I'd read that. I think it came out in the early 2000s. So the Jedward Griffin book.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. And then I kind of put that to one side. We came to Australia in 2004. The brochure that I read, I thought I was going to be kicking back and surfing most of the time, but actually never worked so hard in my life as when we came to Australia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and we'd sold everything to get over here. My wife, 2 kids. I didn't come to a job or anything. We just moved over. I'd never been for a job interview in my life. So I just hit the streets. It took me 6 weeks to find work. I actually started work for a company that I stayed with for 20 years, which I've just rejoined after a year off. Also actually started by a South African. And then where the Bitcoin journey comes in is, I think it was 2016, and I was the CTO at the company. And one of our board advisors said to me, "What do you think of blockchain technology?" And embarrassingly, as the CTO, I said, "Well, what's that?" And he said, "Well, that's the real innovation, with Bitcoin being the first application that was built on it, right? You've heard that narrative." So I thought, well, okay, I'm the CTO. I better actually start finding out a bit more about this.
What is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's the angle I came in on, and kind of fairly quickly arrived at the conclusion that actually Bitcoin was the innovation. Blockchain was just a slow database. And then I started buying it. And then, slowly over time, I started accumulating up until when COVID hit. And I think it was then that I really, really started to dig deep into what this thing really was. And it went from an interest to an obsession. Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Like I feel the same. The amount of money that I had in Bitcoin up to 2020 versus what it is now is like a portfolio allocation is completely different. But the amount of time that I spent thinking about Bitcoin before 2020 was also very small, and it flipped. And where your mind goes, your money follows. And it was just this thing where you're like, oh my God, this solves so many of the problems I've been trying to figure out. What the hell is going on? Let's spend some time just dwelling on the COVID experience that was Australia. And we can talk about whatever we like. If if the powers that be decide they don't like us, they'll, shadow ban me or cancel the channel or whatever. But we'll figure it out, because there's a thing called Noster these days I'm very excited about. But that's another question. What was the COVID experience like for you? And how did that assist in kind of developing your research and then thesis on what's going on?
So I'd gone from being the CTO to actually running the Australian operation of this company. And I remember the day so clearly because it was March the 8th. It was a Sunday. And I was talking to Craig, who owns this company. It's still privately owned. And we were aware that there was this thing, we're seeing the news coming out of China and Italy and everything. We didn't know what it was. And I said, hey, we're a technology company. I'm just going to tell everybody to work from home for the week until we figure out what's going on. So I sent out an email that Arvo. So that was a week before the first government mandated lockdowns came along. My next experience was I like to try and see what I can find out. So what I came across at the end of April, which was a defining moment, was research from a guy called John Ioannidis out of Stanford University, who's like a world-renowned medical statistician. And he had taken, remember there was that Princess Diamond ship that they'd put into quarantine? Yeah. So you had these different age cohorts. COVID had gone right through the whole thing. And his research came on. He said, this thing's a nothing burger. It's orders of magnitude less dangerous than our mate Neil Ferguson. The guy is famous for, he does the climate modeling and everything else. Yeah,
everything's going to die.
Exactly. Yeah. Is it Taleb who says all models are wrong, some are useful, most are dangerous, something like that,
I like
right?
that phrase.
Yeah. So, I'm looking at this and I'm like, woohoo, this is fantastic. This thing's over. It's done, right? I mean, you can see it's completely it's a non-issue for healthy people. Maybe if you old age or have some comorbidities, it might be a problem, but it's got like an infection fatality rate less than the flu. I saw that and then saw this narrative go in the opposite direction. And I wasn't surprised to see the government, seizing the moment to become authoritarian. I think what blew me away was the cognitive dissonance in terms of the minority of the people that I was interacting with. All the people that I knew that I was interacting with at work, there was one who saw it the same way as me. Everyone else was just completely, with the program. And then how quickly that turned. You talk about collectivism. You isolate a certain part of society, especially once we got into the point where vaccine, while not being mandated, your life was going to be pretty unpleasant if you didn't go and get it. Just the way in which we had an interesting house that we'd sold. My wife's a soprano, and we'd built a concert hall downstairs.
Oh wow!
If I'd known we were coming back to Australia, I'd never have sold it, because we'd have concerts and things down there. It was incredible. And during this period, we blacked out all the windows, and people would park their cars kind of around the neighborhood, and then sneak in, and you're having these clandestine meetings. Just how quickly it went from, I'm living in Australia, this place is amazing, to holy moly, I can't drive 5 kilometers to go have a surf. I've got to show papers to sit down and have a coffee.
Yeah, it was crazy. Yeah.
Just unbelievable. I haven't got over it yet, and I'm still kind of, I feel like there needs to be more dialogue about it, and it's still difficult to have in a lot of circles.
Yeah, it was a fascinating experience. I know that listeners on this podcast will have heard me talk about it before, but you probably haven't, Chris. So just very briefly, I was in inner city Melbourne in St Kilda and had my first child born July 2020.
Wow.
And this extraordinary experience where like all of the normal stuff that's available for parents was just gone. Yeah. We actually had a home birth, which was incredibly cool. And the whole experience pushed us down that direction, because the hospital's like, you can't. It's like, we just don't need you guys. Let's do it ourselves. And that was very special. We've now had 3 home births, and it wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
But the experience of saying no to a government saying you have to do this, for me, ended up in extraordinary places. So, walking around parks and people are wearing masks, and they'll like basically scowl at you for walking your dog without a mask on in the open air. I couldn't go and get coffee from the normal place I could get a coffee from because I didn't have the right paperwork. Wasn't allowed into an office. I actually got uninvited to a business lunch when the client found out that I hadn't had a vaccine, and they're like, he's got an exemption, and they're like, oh, my wife's pregnant. I don't want to take that risk. This same guy was pissed in a bar doing cocaine that night, surrounded by people he doesn't know, right? It doesn't make sense. But it was really scary. Suddenly your phone is saying, Telstra, let's vax. The TV's saying, let's vax. The radio's saying, let's vax. It was an absolute onslaught of one story. And it was really difficult, because if you're like, I don't agree with this, then you're a pariah. And we ended up with the police on our doorstep, and someone had dobbed my wife in because she posted on Instagram that she was at a freedom rally.
Wow.
I mean, crazy. She has 600 followers. Like, how would they have known that post was there, other than someone who didn't like what she was doing sending it to them? And it's like, you were outside your 5 kilometers. It's like, okay, so what, the freedom to protest your government doesn't exist any longer? Anyway, to tie it up, there was one specific afternoon where we went to a protest. We had our small baby with us. We had a police officer, female police officer, abuse us for how inappropriate we were as young parents for being there. And that night, the Channel 7 News reported hundreds of protesters and beating up a horse. And I viewed with my own eyes thousands of people. And it's like, hang on a second. So they have just lied by a factor of 10 using the local media. I hadn't seen that before. And you think, fuck, to your point at the start of this conversation, what's real? It's actually making the energy on the back of my neck go up. You're like, why do I know what I know? Like, oh my God. How can they just do that? And it just, it's a real light bulb moment, isn't it? And so why wouldn't you want to take control of your money? And I'm now very much of that opinion that voting doesn't make any difference. Protesting doesn't make any difference. Move your money out of their system into Bitcoin self-custody, see your life improve, and reduce their ownership of you. It's a win-win in that sense.
100%.
But, whoa, you talk about life-changing moments. That was definitely right up there.
Man, but empowering too, right? And I mean, you guys were ground zero in Melbourne.
Melbourne was nuts. Absolutely nuts.
Have you seen that documentary? What's it called? Something Melbourne?
Topher Field made it.
Topher,
Yeah, we were at some of those events that he had footage of.
Yeah, I was at the protest over here, and same thing, you'd hear the 300 boof-heads narrative on the media in the evening. And I was there, and it was the biggest, people saying it's the biggest rally since the Vietnam War.
Whoa.
I mean, tens of thousands of people in Sydney.
Where was that, Chris?
In Sydney, yeah. And up on the Central Coast over here, which is where I live. We had some fair-sized protests here too. Crazy thing was, I remember we were walking across a bridge at the entrance, and people are driving by, and people are hooting and waving and like thumbs up, and even cops and people. It's like, well, where the fuck are you? Come and join us. This little group of lunatics. I think
it was so interesting, wasn't it? So now we can move very nicely into like, well, what is collectivism? What does that mean to you? And this is such a good framing of it, where it's like, oh, join my team. No, join my team. Oh, join my team. Oh, that team's dangerous. Can't join that team. And it's understandably very confusing. And it has changed my life. There's people I don't have friendships with any longer. Very important people in my life that I don't have the same relationship with any longer. And I just do not. I just will never ever bend to the fact that public health policy is not more important than individual choice. Go and fuck yourself. That's insane. But that's the collectivism right there. We'll be better all together. So
nobody's safe until everybody's safe, right?
Yes. Even though it's actually like you have to be 80 and have 4 comorbidities. The data said it. Right? But that didn't make sense. You can't say that.
So I think, the moment you embrace that ideology, the moment you hear somebody talk about the greater good or the public good, you're on the road to hell, because now you start justifying the violation of individual rights for the so-called greater good. And then you have to ask the question, who gets to decide what the greater good is, right? So you get this rulership by the expert class. So I think, Nietzsche said it best with his famous God is dead. He said, well, if God is dead, somebody has to step up to fill his shoes. And that's what you see in that collectivist mindset, right? Is that, okay, well, there's that classic, have you ever seen the Shrek 2 movie?
Yeah.
And there's that little Lord Farquaad or whatever. I love it. He's got that classic line. He says, he's sending them off to go rescue the princess or whatever. He's saying, some of you may die, but that's a risk I'm willing to take, right? And that's it. We are going to do good. You kind of mug the guy, hits him over the back of the head and steal his wallet. And then as you're departing, saying, don't worry, it's for the greater good. This is going to help my grandmother who's sick or something. It's like the moment you allow the justification of theft for the greater good, I think you're on a hiding to nowhere.
Well, it actually reminds me of this is my opinion only, and it's very much like a armchair position without enough understanding, but like going and bombing Iran and saying now there's going to be peace.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Yeah, exactly.
No. Yeah. We're bombing you and now there will be peace.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Yeah. And so, Chris, what intrigues me here, though, is there's no doubt to my mind. Okay, fine. You mentioned things like The Sovereign Individual, awesome book, and The Creature from Jekyll Island. Okay, you're getting into the nitty gritty of like what even is a central bank? How does the Federal Reserve even exist? Who owns it? Who's benefited from it for 100 years? Like there's little tidbits of information you can pull together to understand. Okay, maybe the money that I was born into using isn't as effective for me as I thought it might be. And it's such a penny drop moment for me was that actually money can store value.
Yeah.
I was like, what do you mean money can store value? That's not, no, you have to invest in stuff. It's like, no, saving and investing through a sound money lens are different things.
Yeah.
Completely different risk profile, completely different thing that you're actually doing with it.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, this is magic, really magic. But where I'd like to go, Chris, is this idea of collectivism and saying, okay, if we are too collectivist and there's the, trust the experts, bro type narrative, at the other end of the scale, you've got ultra-libertarian. And it's like, do whatever you want, whenever you want. And yes, there's slightly more of a framework to it than that when you dive deeper into libertarianism, but we are tribes, ultimately. If you struck out on your own from the hunter-gatherer tribe, you wouldn't survive all that long.
Yeah.
If you go ultra-libertarian, a couple thousand years ago, you're probably not going to do that well.
Yeah.
So where's the happy middle ground between that kind of collectivist stupidity and then basically just going to fuck yourself up because you're on your own?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question, right? Because I think everybody gets this notion that like there is a greater good, right? Because we all admire sacrifice. And you're a parent, right? I mean, that for me, that moment was transcendent. The first time I held my first child.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And for the first time, I realized that I would suffer any pain to prevent this child from having any pain, right? So, I mean, there's that sense of sacrificing for a greater good, but there's a difference when you're doing it voluntarily as an individual in the context of a common set of values around life, liberty, and property, as opposed to that being imposed upon you by an authority who's now saying, okay, well, I'm going to be generous off the back of your sacrifice, and that's enforced through, violence at the end of the day, right? Mm-hmm. Try and contest. I wanted to contest. I ended up, it's a long story. We sold up. I wanted to live in El Salvador. I just wanted to get the hell out of South Africa. My wife had been the hell out of Australia.
Yep.
My wife, who's Italian, had been stuck in South Africa for 6 months. We had to apply to some bureaucrat, 3 applications. So her mom, who'd been living in South Africa for a number of years when they moved over from Italy, she had had a stroke. And obviously my wife wanted to go and see her. And suddenly you're in this situation where you've got to apply for permission from some bureaucrat so that you can go and be with your mother before she passed.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
That was mind-boggling. Yeah.
That was the Australian government she had to apply to.
Yep.
Yeah. Unless you were going for more than 3 months, they wanted to see like detailed applications to what you're doing.
Yeah.
It was a great advert for the passport bros. It's like, mate, you need a second passport because then you're straight up.
100%. Yeah. But again, the empowerment that comes through Bitcoin as well, because at one point, so, she'd been there 6 months and I just decided, stuff it, we're selling the house. we're getting out of here. So I sold the house and went to her, but I couldn't travel because I wasn't vaccinated as well. So we were I was in communication with a group called the Freedom Travel Alliance. That's amazing, right? These networks that spring up though, you see the resilience and just the creativity of human beings, right? Like I love that kind of.
Yeah, it's like, no thanks. Let's go this way. Yeah.
You can go do that. We're going to make another plan over here. If we can't fly on your airline, we're going to start.
Better have your booster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, and that's, I think, part of my sanity. I don't know how much longer we're going to be in Oz. There's a chance we might be leaving in September. But
okay.
You got Bitcoin. You will find somebody who's going to accept that Bitcoin, who will fly a private plane into a rural airfield, and you can go over there and you can get the hell out of Dodge, right? You have the promise of a number on a screen, and they just, we've seen it. They just cut it off.
Yes. Yeah, and it's actually, in some ways, it's very helpful to witness the power of the state, because it's not just able to, it's willing. And it did it. There's just countless moments of evidence throughout the world of what were supposedly liberal democracies just got absolutely rolled over by the system that it had created for itself. Now, the conspiracy man within me is like, that was just orchestrated from day one by someone somewhere who was making a ton of money out of it. And you only have to look at the stock prices of the companies selling the medicine that was the result of, just take this and then you'll be fine. It's pretty clear that the incentive there. What was so scary was how the apparatus of the state was used so aggressively. And literally specific examples being some of those protests in central Melbourne. We didn't have any guns. For the first time in my life, I really understood why the gun laws in America are such a passionately and hotly debated topic, and fell down completely on the line of well, it's pretty easy for them to tell us what to do because they have all the guns. Same would apply in the UK. There's no, the populace is unarmed. And central Melbourne was literally a police state. There was hundreds and hundreds of police cars. My wife got arrested at one point. My mother-in-law got arrested at one point.
Wow.
Really aggressively put in handcuffs by policemen walking through the CBD of Melbourne. What the hell's happened to this place? All in the name of health. And in some ways, it's interesting that I even am in Australia still. Even with that, red light, big old red flag there, Jake. What are you still doing here? And if I ask myself that question, I guess it's because it's still quite a nice place to live. And I some part of me doesn't want to give up on the fact that it's a nice place. Do you know what I mean? That's really hard to square away, isn't it?
It is.
Maybe I can ask you, so you said you're going to leave in September potentially. What are the things that you're kind of mulling through as to why or why not?
Well, to be honest, if my wife had loved El Salvador as much as I did, we would still be over there. I didn't do a very good job of preparing her for the reality of, we left South Africa, came to this amazing, Australia's a great place to live. You can't beat this coastline, right? But we're on the Central Coast in New South Wales, and I haven't found many coastlines in the world to rival the beauty of this. You get in some areas of South Africa, but on a smaller scale. But the length of this coastline is just nuts, beautiful. Right? Yeah. So we came back, and that's been tough. I think it took me about 2 years to actually. We came back physically, but for me to kind of emotionally come back, having taken that step to say, bugger it, we're going to do this jurisdictional arbitrage. We're going to go where we treat it best. I wanted mobility and I wanted capital, those two things. And I had this kind of maybe unfounded fear that in Australia I would end up losing it all. I've never been an investor or anything like that, right? I'm an engineer by trade. I always thought financial stuff was too complicated for me to understand, which Bitcoin has transformed because it's quite simple, right? But so we came back. To try and avoid capital gains tax, I started doing the loan thing with Bitcoin and lost a ton through stupidity with BlockFi, and then trying to keep really high loan to value ratios, and then that relies on you being on your game. And anyway,
the liquidation rates are tough. It's so volatile.
Crazy. So I'm opposed on a couple of levels to loans against my Bitcoin. And maybe I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. But in terms of leaving, so an opportunity came up with the company that I'd been with. I left in last May. I just wanted to work in the Bitcoin space. I thought I'm just going to, and I mean, foolishly probably, but it tends to be my nature is because I've got this long relationship with the guy that I worked with for so long. I felt like the moment I was thinking of leaving, I told him I was leaving. So I didn't even have anything to go to. I thought I could sustain myself, for a couple of years and get something going. But through a couple of missteps, I'm back mining fiat. Well, having said that, I mean, I love what I do. I'm heading up leading the AI strategy within this company.
Cool.
Which is interesting as well. And the sort of AI and Bitcoin, there's something in that in terms of Bitcoin being something I think that can keep the dystopian side of AI potentially in check. But I'm still trying to develop my thinking on that. But anyway, the opportunity was to move over to the States because we've got lots of opportunity over there. And so that's the role that I took, but the visa's still being processed. So at this point, we're probably moving over there in September, which will be interesting. Yeah.
Interesting. So something that I'm always looking for, Chris, is decision making. Like, how do people decide what to do? And of course, self-interest drives the vast majority of the choices that we make, but it's not always just about you. Often if you've got someone in your life that you're sharing it with, like, what do they actually want? Or maybe you've got kids, and suddenly it all gets a bit complicated. And it's not as simple as like, fuck it, sell the house, let's go to El Salvador, because then it's like, what are you going to do there?
Most people learn that before they're in their 50s, Jack.
But I think that's cool because I love this phrase, action leads to clarity. Like, without trying, you don't know. And it's the same with the Bitcoin loan experience that you've had. So let's definitely spend a little bit of time talking about that. Because it's sold as this like utopian outcome where it's like, you don't have to sell your Bitcoin, you can take your fiat loan and get on with your life. For you, Chris, that wasn't the case. Can you give me some examples? You have to go completely specific, but you mentioned BlockFi already. What were some of the biggest lessons for you about taking leverage against your Bitcoin?
I mean, when it works, it's awesome, right? I mean, we had a patch there where it was like, and I mean, that can lead to a false sense of wealth as well, because suddenly you can't spend it as fast as your net worth is going up, right? And you're spending this inflating funny money and you're preserving this deflationary asset. And that's amazing. But, not your keys, not your coin, and the BlockFi thing. So we were back in Australia. I'm depressed because I didn't want to come back here. I was finding it
really fun to live with.
really, really difficult. And I thought okay, well, let me be wise. I had it with 3 different, so BlockFi was one of them. And BlockFi was probably the one I did the least diligence on, because I thought, hey, it's in the US. It's like it's the most highly regulated of all of them. The other one was a Swiss company, and the other one was based out of Canada. I think now they're in the Cayman Islands or something. LEDN, and they've actually been pretty good. But suddenly you get liquidated at the bottom of a cycle. I mean, I had plenty collateral, the loan to value. I just actually topped it up, so I put it all back to 50%. But then you discover that they've been rehypothecating your Bitcoin.
The business itself was underwater.
And then they denominate the debt to you in dollars, right? So at the bottom of the market, they say, okay, well, even though you would have X number of Bitcoin left over after we settle the loan, we're going to denominate that in dollars at the bottom of the market. So, you
don't get Bitcoins back. Yeah.
Absolute rinse. Yeah.
I've seen some products coming out. So Ledin is an interesting business for sure. I've never used them myself. I've actually never taken any leverage against my Bitcoin. So it's something I'm slowly but surely looking at.
I want to be like you when I grow up.
Yeah, well,
That's a good call. Yeah.
I hadn't found a system that was going to work for me, and that's why. Just something was holding me back, and that's not to say I didn't get caught out. I did have some stable coins sitting in Celsius that I got 50% of the value or something through some fire sale somewhere, but it absolutely got burnt by that kind of 2022 Q4 kind of kaboom. The whole thing went just nuts, right? And what I thought was actually most interesting about that, in some ways, that's how capitalism should work. There's no lender of last resort, guys. So if you're overexposed to someone who's gone bust, you're gone bust too. And that's exactly how it should be. And it revealed as to just how serious rehypothecation actually is. Because on the way up, everyone's fucking making loads of money. We're so clever. And on the way down, it's like, you're going to jail, mate. You know, it's quite serious.
And those lessons stick. I mean, for the people like myself who made those mistakes.
But that's good though, because I think certainly you say you weren't an investor, but engineers, I believe, make great investors because you're detail oriented. And when you can figure out a system, you're like, sweet, I understand what's going on here. And actually gives me great faith as a non-technical person, or a non-coder, I should say. I've learned a lot more technicalities over time, but someone who's the CTO of a business who's buying Bitcoin, I'm like, well, they know how technology functions. And if they've had a look under the hood of this thing called Bitcoin and they're also buying, well, I can jump on the bandwagon as well and be quite confident I'm making a sound decision. For the leverage stuff, there's a business called Debify that my friend is playing around with, and I had Igor from Firefish on the podcast recently, and they're two businesses that are pioneering the idea of non-custodial Bitcoin lending. So the Bitcoin never ends up in someone else's hands other than in like an escrow account, essentially, which is a multi-sig with 3 keys. The lender keeps a key, the borrower keeps a key, and the platform itself is like a mediator. If you don't pay, then, you know, the contract is enacted, essentially. It's like it's essentially a smart contract on Bitcoin. And that's kind of cool.
It could do something similar with HODL as well.
Correct. It's something I'd like to learn more about. But for me, the debt piece is just, if you could help me buy a house with my Bitcoin, that's where I would get really interested. And so what CJ Konstantinos is doing with the People's Reserve in the US, where he's building a one-to-one collateral Bitcoin mortgage product without a liquidation risk, that is really interesting to me, because then you really can kind of set and forget, and you get a cheaper interest rate. But it's a lot of noise so far. There's no live product, and it'll only be in America, so it's not very helpful for me today.
And what do you do with this is something I've been thinking a lot. So I'm sure you saw Jack Mullis speak recently at the Bitcoin conference, right? And he's so Strike now having this. So Strike now having this lending platform, and he made the comment that borrowing against your Bitcoin and not selling it speeds up the demise of fiat. And I'm kind of struggling to understand how that computes. And I can't get away from this reality that at the other side of this loan that I'm taking, that debt is being issued. So it's this, you know, I think for me, one of the major eureka moments with Bitcoin was understanding that it's thermodynamically sound. So we understand that there's nothing for free, but somehow when it comes to fiat, which is just decreed into existence as a debt, the reality is that somebody somewhere pays. So I'm thinking, okay, cool. I mean, even with our house that we sold, it tripled in nominal value in 10 years, purely through inflation. You know, you couldn't buy anything else with it. It was great because I could make a nice allocation to Bitcoin. But that growth didn't come off the back of additional demand in the area, or, I mean, we hadn't invested a whole lot into the house or anything. That is just purely off the back of debt being issued to, you know, it's wealth extraction. It's economic slavery at the end of the day. So I don't know. I'm kind of, I just want to, like, for me, my ambition now is literally I want to earn Bitcoin, save in Bitcoin, ideally spend Bitcoin. That's where I would like to live.
Cool. I think that should be the default setting for everyone. One thing I'm playing around with, personally speaking, at the moment is, I haven't gone into this yet, but I've been investing for over 10 years now. And it's because, sadly, my father died when he was just 48 years old and I was 20. And so he was a wealthy guy. Within a few years of his death, I was the eldest son, inherited a house. We decided to sell it. I got some money from that. So I had an inheritance. And in my mid-20s, it's like, well, what do you do with this stuff? And if you just sit in the bank, you're going to get inflated to high hell. And so I've been on this whole process of figuring out what do you do with it. And along that, eventually, like, bought a bit of Bitcoin, that Bitcoin gone up, gone down, sold a bit of Bitcoin. Suddenly it's 2020 and it's like, that's the best investment I've ever made. What is this thing?
Yeah.
And then just like the last 5 years been this huge reallocation process. And the average cost of coin is 5 times more valuable in dollar terms today than what I purchased at.
Yeah.
And so at some point, is it prudent to take a bit of profit and start buying some other assets with it? Or do you, because I also personally feel where we are now, June 2025, we're not a million miles off the top of this current bull run.
Yeah.
And yes, it's only 100 US and it's half the value of what I thought it might be. It might get to 150 before Christmas. I'm not nearly as bullish as some of these people that were like, it's going to be 400 grand a coin.
Yeah.
But it's then going to grind all the way back down for 18 months. And 26 is going to be boring as hell. 27 might get interesting again. So now would be the opportunity to potentially take a bit of cream off the top and go, okay, buy some other stuff. So I'm just looking at a startup right now I might put some money into, and equally a trading program that I've come across. But it's very speculative, and it's like, 0.5% or 1% of your net wealth. And it's like, if this goes gangbusters, it's worth it. If it disappears, well, you've got Bitcoin as your engine room, just crunking away in the middle there, getting a 30, 40, 50% CAGR. So it's interesting. And that's where I think this decision-making discussion is so fun, because what do people do with their money? And if you tell me what you own, that's all I need to know. I could spend an hour on a podcast with you, and all I really needed to say was like, what's in your portfolio today? Or what do you do with your money to figure that out? The debt stuff, I agree with you. Like, who's holding the bag? If you're going to give me a 12% loan and that Bitcoin's going to sit there and it's going to completely outpace it in terms of 12%, and I'm going to give you the money back at the end, well, you could have just owned Bitcoin. Why would you do that? So we'll see. Well, Chris, listen, so we're coming up towards an hour. I'd love to spend a little time. So I know that you're working with Bitcoin Mentor. So what's that process been like for you? And if anyone's out there, why would they want to get in touch?
So that's been great. That I just saw it advertised last year. I've always admired the work that Ben does. So they've got quite a nice application process in terms of, you put a video together and there's some interviews, and they do a lot of vetting of the guys of the team. So just for me, the first amazing thing was I get this opportunity once a week to get together with the other mentors and with Ben and just keep up to speed with what's going on. And then I'm also passionate about self-custody. I think Bitcoin is only Bitcoin in self-custody. So their emphasis on that really resonated with me as well. So then the experience that I've had with a couple of the clients over there has been really interesting and really good too. Just being able to help people along on that journey has been pretty rewarding.
Awesome. And I totally agree, Chris, that like, if you don't have your Bitcoin in self-custody, what are you doing? It's not Bitcoin unless it is, essentially. You own a derivative of it. You own IOU. And it's actually so scary. Even there are some Bitcoin companies out there that are like, oh yeah, we help people with self-custody, but they want to keep a key and they want a percent or whatever else the business model is. And it's like, for me, that's not true self-custody, because you've got to call them up to move it. So anyone out there listening, like, be very wary of people that talk about Bitcoin done the right way and things like this, because it's like, well, hang on, you don't have your own keys. If you don't have your own keys, then why is that Bitcoin done the right way? So definitely one to be really careful of. Okay, and Chris, I'll leave it here, which is my final question. What do you think the rest of 2025 is going to be like for us? Like, are you particularly excited about anything, or what are you looking for over the next 6 months?
Us Bitcoiners.
Yeah, what, just straight up as characters, or just you personally?
So, I mean, from a Bitcoin perspective, I have no idea. I thought this revolution was going to take place a lot faster than it has. I would love to have seen more kind of grassroots adoption. So, seeing all the shenanigans with the Wall Street involvement and everything else. I don't know. My sanity is that one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. And I'm focused on just increasing that stash. I mean, what's going to go on in the world? I don't know. I'm quite excited about going to the States. I love the vibe of Texas and those kind of places, but I'm a little bit cautious as well. So
yeah, well, and also, things, if you don't, we don't know what's going to happen. So
exactly. Yeah.
And I think you're right. It's actually, we haven't even touched on that, but I just saw today a newsletter from Anthony Pompliano announcing that he's creating his own Bitcoin Treasury Reserve business, and he's raised the biggest fund ever of $750 million or whatever.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, first of all, you're like, good on him. What a legend. That guy's hustling so hard every day. And sure, I might actually speculate on your equity position. But like at some point, there's just going to be so many of these things. Like the speculative demand, I would imagine, gets hoovered up.
Yeah.
And, you're just putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet. Why would you pay multiples of the asset value underlying to own an equity when you could just own it in self-custody? And it starts to really fall to pieces. And I guess what will happen over time is you'll see who are the truly expert financial engineers and who aren't. And I think Michael Saylor is going to be very hard to beat, to be honest. That guy is so fucking smart. And I'm always very impressed when I listen to what he talks about.
And then I'll have to say, I long for the day when there's no such thing as financial engineering, which is just mutual, voluntary exchange to everyone's benefit, right? I mean,
it's a great
because
point.
that's where they get in between. That's value for value exchange. I love that model. That's the way I want to see the world go. But
I'm into that, Chris.
It's not up to me. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today. If anyone wants to reach out and get in touch, what's the best way to do that?
So best way to do that is hit me up at chris@bitcoinmentor.io, and love to be in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks, Jake.